Week 0 came and went. It was beautiful. It was chaotic. But now we have week 1 to look forward to. As I mentioned, we will talk about that in all of its glory on Thursday morning's episode, both on the Apple, Spotify podcasting side, also on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed for that. Guys, we end today's episode with key storylines and questions that we have ahead of the 2024 season. It's kind of a palate cleanser, a primer, if you will, before we dive headlong into week 1. Trey, I've got a couple of different storylines here on the run of show. I'll let you take your pick. Which one interests you the most, or maybe you have a write-in candidate?
Let's talk about the 12-team playoff, because even ESPN's in studio personalities could not get this correct consistently on Saturday. So we'll give them. It was week 0 for them too, and we'll give them some grace. But yeah, let's talk about the expanded playoff and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. So as ESPN unfortunately failed to get right, they did talk about their 12 teams, obviously, that makes up this bracket. Top 5 conference champions get auto bids. Now, what they got wrong was they insisted the first time, at least, that the group of 5 team automatically gets the 12th seed. That is not the case. That is just kind of assumed by us, the college football media in general, that whoever takes that spot will likely be the 12th seed. As ESPN also emphasized, the rankings for the college football playoff that start coming out in late October, early November, something like that, they are not the same things as the seedings. So the rankings will look very different in most cases from what we actually get as a 12-team bracket. You will have 4 Power 4 conference champions. That is automatically the top 4 seeds. You will have the group of 5 champion that, I guess they could be a top 4. It's the top 4 conference champions. So if you have, a Mountain West school or Memphis, for instance, they beat Florida State, they go 12-0, maybe they sneak into the top 4. That would be important because the top 4 conference champions get a bye. The rest of the teams, 5 through 12, have to play a first round game on the campus of the higher seeded school. I have an interesting question about Notre Dame. I want to save that for just a little bit. So put a pin in that. We'll come back to the Fighting Irish. In general, we like the first round being played on campus, yes?
Love it. Absolutely love it. It's my favorite thing about the 12-team play.
It's fantastic. It's the real difference between what we have in college football versus like all the other sports that exist is you do get home games for the playoffs. You get rewarded for performing, and you should get rewarded for performing, right? If you have a great home field or if you got great rabid fans, like you should get rewarded for that, right? Like Kansas City, when they, go and they play in the NFL playoffs, they have great fans. They always make noise. It's super cold. They get the advantage from that. And you should get that advantage for playing well in the regular season. And so, getting to play those games on campus, I think are kind of fun. I wish we would move in a direction where we do more of that. And maybe just the last game is a, specific selection of a rotating venue or something like that. But we'll work towards it.
Trey's decided to opt out of the rest of the storylines. I'm sure he'll be back in just a few minutes. Storyline number 2, we have Power 4 realignment. We no longer have the Pac-12. Unfortunately, last year they went out with a bang, and we certainly appreciate what they did.
Q, I will remember you.
Yeah, exactly. Pac-12 falls apart. We have different members dispersed to the Big 10, to the Big 12. Strangely enough, to the ACC. The number of times I'm going to have to remind myself that UCLA Rutgers is a conference game later on this season is going to get annoying. There's no doubt about it. In fact, UCLA travels
going all the way across. It's just dumb. You shouldn't have that stuff.
Exactly. UCLA travels something like 22,000 miles over the course.
I mentioned this in the offseason. UCLA travels more this year than 26 NFL teams do, despite the fact that they play 3 fewer road games.
That's
so dumb.
That's mind-numbing for sure. What to watch for as far as Power 4 contenders, you have teams like Texas and Oregon are national title contenders. They have switched conferences. Texas is in the SEC. Oregon is now in the Big 10. Storyline number 3. Who is college football's new king? With Nick Saban retiring, that leaves a power vacuum, not only at Alabama, but in the college football coaching world in general. Garrett, many people are going to assume that Kirby Smart steps into that role, but even if he does, there's a long way to go from what Kirby has done, which is amazing, and what Nick Saban did. Not only considering the championships he won, but the consistency with which Alabama won.
Yeah, and I think he has the potential to. This is actually kind of the interesting storyline about college football in sort of a long-term sense is what can Kirby Smart accomplish, and can he maybe make a run at Saban? Because you got to remember, Kirby Smart much younger than what Saban was when he started at Alabama. And so Kirby Smart's going to have a lot more time to kind of dominate Georgia if that's what he wants to do. At some point, does he want to go to the NFL? Does he want to, move on somewhere else? I don't know. Like we don't know that, and so it'll be interesting to watch those storylines. I'm sure there will be teams that in the NFL that make a run at Kirby Smart when they really need a head coach, and so we'll have to see what he wants to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Kirby Smart is the king of our current college football right now. There's a couple coaches that I think could make runs if they can set their programs up right. Love what Dan Lanning's doing at Oregon. I would have told you Mike Norvell, Friday, but maybe not loving so much right now. He's got a little bit more to prove maybe than that. And then obviously, if Ryan Day can figure it out at Ohio State, he's got all the pieces in the right place. He's just got to start winning some games that matter. But really the interesting thing, I think, right now is Kirby start playing against Saban's legacy, right? Saban is clearly the greatest college football coach we've seen. It's not debatable. Second place, probably Bear Bryant at this point. But Kirby Smart could go do something about it. He's got to start winning some championships, going on some runs, all the draft talent that he's got to go put out. He's got to keep that going for the next, 5, 6, 7 years. And then we can start talking about, okay, well, who was the better coach? Who did this better? And we'll have a little bit of that overlap there in their careers, which will be the part that we probably end up going back and analyzing and trying to figure out who's the best. But it does give us a cool storyline for the next, decade or two, probably, that we get to talk about.
Final storyline that we identified to keep an eye on, just remind you of future of NIL in the Group of Five conferences. If you don't know, there is currently a thought out there that the Power Four need to become their own league, that the Group of Five simply won't be able to hang with those power conferences and compete for a national championship. We are staunch opponents of that notion, despite what NIL, the transfer portal, are doing. We believe that these Group of Five teams can compete. There are plenty of opportunities for Group of Five teams to upset Power Four teams. Talked about Memphis and Florida State. A lot of eyes are going to be on that one. Tulane and Oklahoma. I mean, the list goes on and on. So if you're looking for something, a thread to watch throughout the course of the regular season, keep tabs on how many of the top G4 or G5 teams are able to upset those Power Four teams. I think it's going to be a fun season in that regard.
And so everyone who thinks that that's a dumb proposition, that, there's no way that these teams could compete. Nevada almost beat an ACC team this last weekend. And, all you have to do is keep going back a couple years. You can think about teams like App State that have beaten, in the last 20 years, teams like Michigan and Texas A&M and notched some pretty signature wins. And you can go back and you can make plenty of examples of this, and you can go back and analyze all these teams. Boise State being as dominant as they were for a while there towards the end of the 2000s. It happens. These teams can be really, really good. Don't count them out just because you have them on paper as worse teams. That's dumb. That's not fair. These teams are playing the same sport, and they should be able to go out there and go up against them head to head and prove that they can be that good of a team.
So we've also got a couple of questions that we wanted to ask as we bring this episode home, and we'll start with a hypothetical, something that we've referenced on the conference previews. I want to know, what do we think the committee does with college football teams that lose their conference championship games? In the past, those teams might get a New Year's Six bowl if they're lucky. In the 4-team playoff, it was almost a certainty that if you lost your conference championship game, you were out of the playoff running. Georgia certainly didn't think that was going to be possible last year, but lo and behold, they were indeed left out after going undefeated all season long. In the new 12-team expanded era, I highly doubt that happens quite often, but temperature check. If, let's say, Alabama loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game, and that's their third loss, do you think that the Tide are in a spot to get left out of the college football playoff, or could they make it as an 11 or 12 seed?
Man, this is my favorite question to kind of answer because I get to go, it depends, right? It really depends. Like, is Alabama in with their 2 losses, but those 2 losses are breaking like a 4-way tie for 10-2 in the SEC with some kind of weird scoring metric, or they ended up drawing straws or something like that? Like that could be the case. And if they lose, then they might be out because a 10-2 Ole Miss, 10-2 Texas, 10-2 LSU, 10-2 Tennessee, 10-2 Missouri, like any of those could be teams that jump them if they were all of a sudden 10-3 with that conference championship loss. And maybe it comes down to signature wins, right? That's a metric that I think we're going to probably have to look into, is not just did you lose games, but did you beat anybody that mattered, right? Did you beat anybody head to head where you can kind of transitive your way through another conference and say, well, you beat this team and this team beat that team, and so you're better than the ACC champ or something. Like you'll kind of have to start going through that and saying, strength of schedule, quality wins, signature moments, stuff like that. But it really depends. I think that some runners up in conferences might be a little bit, more appealing than others. Like, if you're the Oregon Ducks and you've only lost the one game, or you've only lose to Ohio State one time that season and end up as your, kind of runner up in the conference championship game. Yeah, that could be a moment where you say Oregon probably needs to be in there. Ohio State could be in the same situation if they flip-flop with Oregon. They probably deserve to be in there. Does, 9-3, 10-2 going into the conference championship, Kansas or Kansas State losing to Utah or something like that, do they deserve to be in? Maybe not, right? Maybe they don't deserve it because they don't have the quality wins that the other teams have. And so it probably depends on resume, but that's what's interesting is now we're not fighting over 4 spots and we can't just say conference champs and oh well. Now we're getting to talk about 12 spots and who really deserves it, even outside of the 5 auto bids. There's going to be some really good teams that are going to have to go kind of head to head with the resume. And ultimately, like what we said when this was introduced, was at the end of the day, whoever gets in as number 12 or number 11, whoever gets left out in that 13, 14, 15, they're going to have a lot less of a case than teams like 5 and 6 have in the past.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree with that. Does Notre Dame have an unfair advantage? Now, the theory is, as Nick Saban actually talked about on College Game Day, the Notre Dame has a schedule that's very conducive to them making the college football playoff. 11-1 gets them in, 10-2 perhaps not. We'll have to wait and see. But Notre Dame does not have a conference to play a championship game in. And so Notre Dame cannot be one of the top 4 seeds. That goes to the top 4 conference champions from around the country. But because they don't have to play in a conference championship, they essentially get a bye heading into what many are presuming would be a home playoff game in round 1 of the college football playoff. Does that inherent bye and no conference championship game give the Fighting Irish an advantage?
It does, in my opinion. Like, I really do think it's an unfair advantage because a lot of times when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, there's only really a couple games you're worried about them losing. And that's not necessarily different for a lot of the top teams in college football. The difference is Notre Dame sometimes really has some ugly bye weeks where it's, playing some teams where it's not technically a bye week, but, you don't really have to show up. You can still beat that team. I don't want to trash them because I like what they are. I do like the kind of independent notion from Notre Dame that they can kind of just be their own team and stand up by themselves. And I do like that. I think that if it were up to me, I would make some kind of weird arbitrary rule where it's like, hey, Notre Dame, you get to get in if your strength of schedule finishes in the top 12, and otherwise it doesn't matter how good you are, we're going to leave you out. Just, oh, you're undefeated. Great. Your strength of schedule was, 37. No, you're not in. You just don't get to be in this year because I think it starts to run the risk of them being the same as some of these G5 teams where, Notre Dame fans are going to say, well, we beat everyone we played. We can only beat the teams that are on the schedule. And that is true, but that's also true for teams this year like Liberty, who will probably go undefeated against a really crappy schedule. And I'm not saying that Notre Dame's schedule this year is as weak as Liberty's, but I'm saying in past years, when you compare what Notre Dame is to some of the teams on their schedule, it's kind of weak. And so I think Notre Dame should kind of be forced to schedule some harder games on their schedule to be rewarded with the playoff spot.
I guess it really depends on what you think of USC, for instance, this year, which
Sure,
we're
yeah.
down on USC, but
Or Florida State now. I mean, that's a game now that if Florida State loses a couple by the time they get there, if USC is not all that good and we don't think that they are, and Florida State ends up being like a 2 or 3 loss team by the time they get to Notre Dame, like their signature win's going to be over A&M this year. Is that it? Like, I can't make the argument that that team, you know, gets to just take the playoff spot because they beat teams with good names.
Final question. I'll ask this in 2 parts. You can just give me a quick hitter. Who do you think has the better chance of making the playoff this year? We'll go to the SEC first. LSU or Oklahoma are your options. We'll go to the Big Ten next.
Out of those teams, LSU or Oklahoma, I'm going to lean LSU just off of schedule. LSU does not play as hard of a schedule as Oklahoma does. Oklahoma plays, I think, like 5 or 6 of the teams that finished in the top, like 5 or 6 of the SEC last year. And so for whatever you think that's worth, Oklahoma has a brutal schedule year one. So just on schedule, I'm going to say LSU has a better chance. Now, Oklahoma starts winning some of those games. They're going to have a much better case at, you know, if they go 10-2 or 9-3, they have a much better case than almost anyone in the SEC if they can go 9-3 on that schedule.
Yeah, I'll take Oklahoma for that exact reason. I think they've got the better quarterback, and they've certainly got the better defense. Those are often key ingredients to success. I think LSU is going to go something like 8-4 this year, 9-3. Right. I think they're going to vastly underperform for what their fans maybe are expecting. In the Big Ten, you have to pick between Michigan or Penn State. Only one of them makes the playoff. Which one is it?
Call me a homer. I think it's Michigan. I think Michigan is the better team still, and for several reasons. But my main one is the fact everyone's going to make a whole lot out of the offensive, you know, lack of talent or drop off or whatever else. JJ McCarthy last season took a step in the right direction, but was not a massive game changer. He definitely made some plays that he didn't get enough credit for. He was definitely a better quarterback than many people thought he was. But let's be honest, JJ McCarthy was not lighting the world on fire winning games for Michigan. It was their dominant style of play. It was the fact that they could run the football and they could, you know, really wear you down. And they still have elements of that. Donovan Edwards is still an elite running back, and I think we'll show that enough this year. My only issue with Michigan is going to be lack of signature wins. I think they have a real good chance to go maybe 10-2, 9-3. And if you do, if you go 10-2, you're going to find one of those as a signature win. Otherwise, I just think they might have a hard time making the case that they're a top team if they don't beat anybody of note.
I think Penn State is almost a lock to go 10-2 on this schedule. And so I agree. I think more than likely, I like what Penn State has in totality more than Michigan. I think they're certainly, I mean, that's the James Franklin MO is 10-2, maybe 11-1. That would be good enough to get you into the playoff most years. So I'll go with Penn State here. I like what the Nittany Lions have. I just, you know, I need to see it. I need to see them perform at a championship level when the chips are down consistently. Hope we get that this year.
Gracious, how about